Anfield is a very special place. It's housed so many impressive individuals, it's hard to keep up. But among those, a name that rings louder than most is Bill Shankly. If you've ever noticed, Liverpool has a very different relationship with their managers than many other clubs. Where other clubs tend to fixate on players for the most part, the Liverpool faithful put a huge emphasis on the man in charge. Shankly transformed Liverpool into a phenom. He planted the seed and they became the greatest English team to ever exist. The silverware won by him, his apprentices, and backroom staff speak for itself. Despite that, and let this be a lesson to all of you, even the best of us make mistakes. In 1966, a 15-year-old boy walked through the gates of Anfield for a trial, hopeful to become part of the journey. He did not make the cut. That boy was Kenny Dalglish. 52 years later, he was officially more formally known as Sir Kenneth Dalglish. Dalglish is one of the most successful and enigmatic figures in football history, a player nobody could touch, a manager that could lead the most pessimistic of players over a cliff, a man that could make it anywhere. How many men out there can say they replaced Kevin Keegan twice and managed John Barnes, Ian Rush, Alan Shearer, Fernando Torres, and Luis Suarez? Not many. Also, his daughter, Kelly Cates, is now hosting Match of the Day. Excellence runs in the family. His story is a complex one, and not one without tragedy. He's had to endure and witness more catastrophe than most, where lives have been lost and countless more affected. 3 separate, devastating situations. However, his response to all of these has shown what kind of a man he truly is, from supporting those affected by said disasters, to aiding in the raising of over £10 million for cancer patients in need, as well as research for future treatments. It's no wonder so many have, and always will, refer to him as royalty. Today, we look into the finer details. After, we'll be able to answer the question of the day, a question that extends far beyond the pitch. How good was Sir Kenneth Mathieson Dalglish? Born in Glasgow in 1951, Kenny Dalglish's journey to footballing greatness started like many. He was born into a football-loving family. Rangers were the team of choice. At 14, Dalglish and his family moved into a tower block in Ibrox, a stone's throw from Rangers Ibrox Stadium. To many, proximity is often considered the marker of a true fan. I guess this was destiny playing its hand. However, destiny, as it turned out, had other plans, because it seemed like there was a lot more green and white waiting for him in his very near future. When Celtic's assistant manager, Sean Fallon, came knocking in 1967, the Dalglish household wasn't exactly prepared to host a visitor of these particular colours. Rangers posters adorned the walls. It must have been quite the sight for Fallon. Not that I think that would have mattered. Dalglish was a very well-known talent by this point, and Fallon came there on a mission, and after shaking hands with Dalglish's father, he had accomplished it. And something you need to understand about this decision was that this was no ordinary offer. Celtic were the best team in all of Europe, literally. Under the coaching of iconic manager Jock Stein, only weeks after this house visit, the club would go on to claim their first ever European Cup title, becoming the first British team to ever lift the trophy, and the first British team to win a European treble, 2-1 to Inter Milan, who were already 2-time winners at this point. This was the team that was about to give Kenny Dalglish his footballing education. Things were always going to be a little spicy for the man. His early years saw him farmed out to Cumbernauld United for experience, a semi-professional team where he faced grizzled veterans of the Scottish League, many of whom were either past their prime or seeking redemption, or just seeking someone to take out their frustrations on. Celtic's intention was to toughen him up, and it seemed like it worked. He learned how to handle himself amongst physically stronger opposition, something he definitely needed as a younger man still growing. And it seems it works wonders. He scored 37 goals in his sole season. Fun fact, while he was on loan there, he worked as an apprentice joiner. So let that be a lesson to everyone. You always need a backup plan, even if it comes out of the woodwork. I'm not sorry about that joke. In Dalglish's initial years with Celtic's reserve, he was still finding his feet, but when he transitioned into midfield the year after, things began to change as he helped the reserve team secure a league and cup double. And I guess this was likely a glimpse into why Dalglish was so special. His outlandish versatility. What made him shine in those early reserve years at Celtic was how exceptional his vision was, how deft his touch and technical skills were, and how hardworking he was for the team. He was such a good ball carrier and so hard to get off the ball. And even when it looked like he'd been holding on for too long, he would pull off a pass that nobody in an 80,000-seater stadium but him could see. He continued to improve, scoring goals, taking names. Starting in 1969, he began slowly appearing in the first team, but it was only by 1971 that he started to establish himself in the main squad. Sadly, 1971 was a very significant year, both for Dalglish and the footballing world. It was the year of the Ibrox disaster. As I said at the start, a tragic fact about Dalglish's footballing career is that he had to bear witness to more disaster than anyone should, all football and stadium related. The 1971 Ibrox disaster was a stadium crush that occurred at the Ibrox Stadium in an exit stairway. It claimed the lives of 66 people and injured a further 200. The point of origin was a staircase known to be problematic in handling large crowds. At the time, this was the worst footballing related disaster in history, and that remained the case until 1989. Dalglish was present at both. 20 years of age and already one of the world's greatest, that was Kenny Dalglish in 1971. In his first full season, 71-72, he scored 29 goals across all competitions and claimed his first league and cup double. Now, this was Celtic's 7th consecutive league title in a row, so this wasn't exactly a history-altering achievement for the club, but it was the one that got the ball rolling for the man that would soon become the king. It was a common understanding among those who watched the Scottish game that when the ball fell to Dalglish, something was about to happen. Is he gonna float past the defender and make an impossible pass? He's one-on-one with the keeper. It's gonna be a goal. But how's he gonna do it? He had every finish in his locker, and by 1975, he had been chosen as the team captain. He never managed to get past the semi-finals of the European Cup while playing at Celtic, but with 4 league titles and 4 Scottish Cups, and 173 goals over 338 appearances by the age of 25, he had cemented himself as one of the best players to ever do it in green and white. And you know, that's not too bad for a Rangers fan. I doubt any of the Celtic faithful care about that little detail though. But what I'm sure they did care about was that their world beater was attracting a lot of attention across the borders. Liverpool main man Kevin Keegan was on the move to Hamburg in 1977, £500,000 all in all, a British transfer record. The man was a global phenomenon. I guess players were a bit more candid back then, or maybe it was just him, but in 1979, he gave an interview admitting to having a salary jump from £22,000 a year to £122,000 a year after moving to Germany. His perm was something initially mocked, but eventually admired and copied. I only say all of this to preface just how big of a deal he was and what Liverpool were losing. Their response? Out with Keegan, in with Dalglish. £440,000, a record fee paid by a British club. So, I want to rewind just for a second here before we move any further. I stated earlier that around 15 years of age, a year before going on to join Celtic, Dalglish made a trip down to England. He did so for some trials. And one of those trials was in London with West Ham. In his 2014 autobiography, Harry Redknapp, who, believe it or not, was 21 years old and a West Ham player at the time, speaks highly of how talented Dalglish was, even back then. He claims that during his 2-week trial at West Ham, he had a session with the first team and prompted a standing ovation. One of the lads laid a ball to him and it was like fast forwarding through the next 20 years of British football. He took it perfectly, dropped a shoulder, turned and curled it into the far right corner of the net. Our reserves didn't know what hit him. Both sets of players just stopped and applauded. However true that story is, and however good he was at the time, he was not offered a place at the club. Redknapp claims that this is due to Dalglish already being earmarked as a future Celtic player, so it was actually West Ham who didn't stand a chance of signing Dalglish. And you know, there could be some truth to that. Another team he trialed for was Liverpool, although in this case, it seemed as though this was a case of both parties not entirely being convinced of one another. After spending some time on trial with Liverpool, it seems they weren't completely swayed and he was asked to extend his trial for further assessment. He refused. Why? He told them it was because he had another trial to go to. The truth? Rangers were playing Celtic at the Ibrox that night. He wasn't about to miss that for anything or anybody. As the years went on and Dalglish became a household name, Shankly was informed of the talent that was once at his fingertips a few times. He was not impressed with himself. In fact, by the time everything came full circle and Dalglish was on his way to Liverpool, Bill Shankly, who had since stepped aside from the manager role, had some choice words for Celtic. "It's the most unbelievable thing I've ever known. I would rather have quit and got out of the game altogether than sold a player of his brilliance." I don't think the irony was lost on him. But luckily, things worked out for everyone in the end, I would think. And who knows if Dalglish would have gone on to become the player that he did had he not made a name for himself at Celtic. Nobody, that's who. Plus, it's not like Liverpool were doing too badly before he arrived. Like he did at his previous club, Dalglish joined a side that had just been crowned as European champions for the first time and had won the league title. They were an FA Cup final defeat away from being the first English side to win the European treble. Their opponent? Manchester United. As I said, Shankly was out, but his spirit and vision lived on within Bob Paisley, who took over. Paisley was Shankly's assistant manager throughout his entire Liverpool career. From the perspective of the man himself, the reason he left Celtic in the first place didn't seem to have a whole lot to do with nailing his second chance at the club specifically, more so to do with fulfilling his own potential. "I had to know if I could make it somewhere else. I did not want to go through the rest of my life wondering what might have been without putting myself to the test." To set the scene, by the 70s, Liverpool and Glasgow were similar in some ways. Both cities shared several similarities as post-industrial cities facing economic decline, low morale, and low pay. Football was a sweet release, and expectations were high all round. With Keegan gone, the expectations placed on Dalglish were larger than what most have to deal with, but it didn't look like that bothered him in the slightest. He hit the ground running, scoring on his debut. It seems he further eradicated any doubt that came in his ability when he scored the 6th goal in a 6-0 thrashing of Kevin Keegan's Hamburg only months after each had joined their respective clubs. That feeling of him being a danger man at all times did not go away as he racked up 31 goals across all competitions. One of those goals was the only one in the European Cup final against Bruges, the first European Cup of many. During his time at Liverpool, Dalglish formed partnerships with several players, but the one that stands out the most amongst the crowd, eclipsing many of today's standards, is his partnership with Ian Rush. Like I said, Dalglish was a creative force and a potent finisher, although here he was more often the orchestrator. His playmaking complemented Ian Rush, who was an even more potent finisher, to a T. And Rush, he was an animal, true to his name, had the pace and ferocity to cause very real damage. One of the best examples came in the Merseyside derby on the 6th of November 1982, a 5-0 win over Everton at Goodison Park. Rush scored 4 times, and Dalglish was heavily involved in each goal. I should note that this was slap bang in the middle of a period where Merseyside was the overwhelming leading force in English football, known as the Merseyside Monopoly. In the 80s, the title was more or less kept between Anfield and Goodison Park, and here we have Dalglish and Rush making a mockery of their crosstown rivals. Realistically, these two formed the greatest striking partnership English football has ever seen. The 1982-83 season was a standout, with the duo scoring a staggering 52 goals between them. The next year, they did even better, 59 goals between them. Assist numbers from back then, they're all quite dodgy, so I don't feel very confident in showing you what I managed to find, but just know that Dalglish was hitting all-time numbers if you go back and watch some of these games. Together, they lifted 5 First Division titles, 2 FA Cups, and 1 European Cup. At the heat of all of this success for Liverpool, Kenny Dalglish, along with Graham Souness, who was the captain at the time, were the highest paid players in the country, and nobody could say that it was undeserved. And while the likes of Souness and Rush ended up leaving the club towards the late 80s, even though both would return, Dalglish stayed put. He was far from finished. Before the next step, however, tragedy struck once again, this time in Brussels, Belgium. The Heysel disaster. 29th of May, 1985. The European Cup final was taking place between Juventus and Liverpool. Tensions within the crowd were growing before the match as fans rushed each other and a crush ensued. In the chaos, 39 lives were claimed overall. Shockingly, the players had been informed of this huge loss of life prior to kickoff, but UEFA officials and officials from the English, Italian, and Belgian FAs decided the game should go on. Liverpool were defeated by a 0-0. Not only that, but Liverpool fans were blamed for causing the disaster. As a result of this, English clubs were banned from competing in European competitions for 5 years. Liverpool was banned for 6. Prior to the Heysel disaster, Liverpool had already been prepping for a change in leadership. Joe Fagan, Liverpool manager at the time and a part of Shankly and Paisley's coaching staff from the beginning, decided to step down. You've probably noticed that this club has a habit of promoting from within, so maybe you can guess who was up next. In 1985, Kenny Dalglish was 34 years of age. It was the year he turned from player to player manager. An interesting position to be in. Given the state of football in today's day and age, I can't really fathom the idea of a modern player doubling as a coach. What's to stop them from subbing themselves on to hit appearance bonuses? What's that? I'm the only one that would do that? Right, never mind. Funnily enough, the thing about all this is that even if he were to sub himself on, nobody would complain. As per former Liverpool centre-back Mark Lawrenson, it didn't make any difference to the team that Kenny managed us as well as played. He was still undeniably our best player, and I guess nobody should be surprised by this. When a man of Dalglish's stature speaks, you listen.
He took to it like a duck to water, really. I think he was... he had to sort of change, be more... distance himself from the players, but at the same time he'd still be mates with.
In his first year as player manager, he won the league and FA Cup double. The FA Cup final was won against Everton. He started. Liverpool won the title on the final day after a 1-0 win to Chelsea. Dalglish scored that goal. A player that delivers, a manager that delivers. What a guy. Knowing that his time was coming and committing more and more to the manager role, his game time decreased as he let others take the spotlight. 3 such players he gave the limelight to: John Barnes, John Aldridge, and Peter Beardsley. Among others, Liverpool was set up well for a successful future, which is exactly what they had. 1990, Kenny Dalglish appeared in a Liverpool shirt for the final time, bringing to a close a legendary playing career, ushering in a legendary managing career. Although he had already been managing for about 5 years at this time and had picked up 2 league titles, 2 FA Cups, and the Manager of the Year award 3 times. He won the league again that very year. And bear in mind that all of this included losing the 1988 FA Cup final by a 0-0 and only losing the 1988-89 year on goals scored to Arsenal. The points tally and goal difference were equal. It really does make you stop and think how Liverpool may have performed had they not been banned from European competitions. As I've already said a few times, in my humble opinion, Liverpool in the late 70s and early 80s are the most dominant English side ever. Something that is common knowledge, but I feel is soured by the fact that they were banned for those 6 years. In the 8 years before that, they made 5 finals and won 4. Many still argue that the match that was lost shouldn't have even been played in the first place due to the surrounding circumstances. All the orchestrators of their success were extremely committed to the cause. Internal promotion was rife and it was working. As someone who grew up with Manchester United under Sir Alex Ferguson, I feel as though I personally never understood, or rather didn't inform myself, of the gravity of this achievement when I was growing up. Having said all of this, unfortunately, dark times were never too far away. Hillsborough, the 3rd stadium disaster in Dalglish's career and the most fatal in British sporting history. 15th of April 1989, Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield. The FA Cup semi-final, 97 lives claimed and over 760 injured. The cause has since been attributed to overcrowding of standing terraces and severe police mismanagement, which led to supporters outside the stadium entering the already overcrowded area. The game was called off after 6 minutes and rescheduled. This was an extremely significant event for Dalglish, who again watched on as mayhem unfolded. In the aftermath, Dalglish and his team set out to attempt to comfort all those in mourning. We made sure somebody with Liverpool connections was at every funeral, and I think the families really respected that. The boys weren't obtrusive in any way. They sat back and let the families get on with the grieving, but they were there. Their presence was there. It's reported that he personally attended up to 4 funerals in a day to offer support. This entire situation shook him to the core and affected him more than any of us will ever know. At the end of many of the funeral services, "You'll Never Walk Alone" was sung. He couldn't bring himself to sing along. The same song is on repeat at every game. He was becoming unsure of himself. He turned to wine to be more personable around people, and eventually he couldn't take it anymore. In February of 1991, 2 days after a historic 4-4 draw to Everton in the FA Cup, he decided that it was in his and the club's best interest to part ways. Just like that, this shocked everyone. Liverpool chairman Noel White was on record saying that they tried everything possible to have him see out the season.
What did you try to do to dissuade him?
Everything possible. Everything possible.
I've been in the front line for 20 years, and it's just really a result of 20 years active involvement in football at a very high and successful level that really kind of reached a person has pushed himself to the limit.
Interestingly, in Dalglish's autobiography, published 6 years after his resignation, he highlighted how spontaneous that decision was for him. The implications of what I had done sank in firstly when I returned home to see the tears on my children's faces. He noted that had Liverpool waited until the summer to find a replacement and asked him to rejoin, he would have done so in a heartbeat. All of this is understandable. What he really needed was a mental reset, and bear in mind that he was only 40 years old, a seasoned veteran, sure, but still 10 years younger than Sir Alex Ferguson, for example. He was certainly not done with football yet. However, I think many didn't expect the move he was about to make. Enter Jack Walker, millionaire steel magnate, worth around £360 million in 1990. And if you're too lazy to do the math, that's a lot of cash. He also happened to be a man hailing from Blackburn.
But it's a club with big ambitions thanks to benefactor Jack Walker. In football terms, a sort of Elton John of the North, but richer.
With all his wealth, he did what everyone who says they know how to fix the club they support dreams of doing. He bought Blackburn Rovers with the intention of making them a football powerhouse. They were a second division side that had failed to achieve promotion in 3 years. So he did what most owners nowadays refuse to do, put a lot of his own skin in the game. And people knew he was deadly serious about his intentions when he pulled Kenny Dalglish back into the game as the Blackburn manager. I should note that this happened in 1991, October of 1991. This happened only 8 months after he left Liverpool. Because of how abruptly he left the club, ultimately leading to them losing from a winning position, many were not happy with this development. When Dalglish left, Liverpool were leading the league by 3 points. By the end of the season, they lost it by 6. Makes you wonder what Walker put on the table to make him come back.
Dalglish won't come cheaply. £1 million over 4 years is the reported deal.
And I repeat, Blackburn were a second division side at the time. But, and I feel like I've said this a couple of times already in this video, that didn't seem to matter that much at all. Blackburn finished 6th in his first year, just good enough to make the playoffs. And they finally did it, promoted to the Premier League. In came stars such as Alan Shearer, Chris Sutton, Tim Sherwood, Jason Wilcox, and others. Walker made sure he got only the best.
Can you tell us anything about what sort of finance might be available to Kenny?
What it takes.
And because Dalglish has a habit of making things look easy, Blackburn finished 4th in their first year up, 2nd the year after that, and they bettered that in the only way possible in the 4th year, champions of the Premier League. It's a magical tale, one I covered in more detail in this video if you're interested, but as for Dalglish, all you need to know is that he is something of a miracle worker. As recent times have shown us all, money alone doesn't win titles. It takes hard work, it takes strategy, it takes authority. Dalglish had all of these in droves, and to top it all off, the league was won on the final day of the season. Oddly enough, Blackburn Rovers lost on that day to Liverpool. Rovers were 2 points ahead and needed a win to secure the title, but they lost. Although that didn't matter because Manchester United drew their match versus West Ham. So on the final day at Anfield, Liverpool fans celebrated a win and the prevention of Manchester United winning a league title, while Blackburn fans lost on the day but celebrated a trophy. This was 30 years ago, and the man at the center was loved by all, bringing joy to Liverpool fans wherever he goes, it seems. A true legend. It wasn't to last though. Dalglish left his role as manager and took up the position as director of football for Blackburn. Blackburn built a great team but were unable to do it again and again, something that's a bit of a requirement for sustainable success in football. The next few years are the ones that you won't hear about all too much. The life of Kenny Dalglish before '96 was one of runaway success in every aspect. Whatever this man touched in football eventually turned to gold. That was no longer the case after, but I must stress, he didn't exactly fail, he just did okay. Newcastle United, January 1997. Halfway through the year, he replaces Kevin Keegan for the second time and does quite alright, guiding them to second place after taking over with them in fourth. He then makes a mistake, deciding to get the gang all back together, signing John Barnes and Ian Rush, 34 and 36 years old respectively, as well as his own son, Paul Dalglish. There were some good signings in there somewhere, but they didn't make the splash Dalglish likely wanted. 13th place finish, sacked 2 days into the following season. From there, he spent some time as a caretaker for Celtic, even won the Scottish League Cup, but he was dismissed when Martin O'Neill was brought in as a permanent manager. Fun fact, I mean, it's fun depending on where you sit, what side of the table you sit on. He sued Celtic for unpaid wages, bonuses and benefits, and he even got the last laugh as the case was settled outside of court for over £600,000. It would be 11 years before Dalglish returned to the game, and by that time, the landscape of Liverpool Football Club was very, very different. The year was 2011, and Liverpool had not won a league title since 1990, Kenny Dalglish's last full season with the club. Rafa Benitez had a good run, but he was ultimately shown the door.
I have to talk about facts.
Roy Hodgson was not a good pick after him, so he was shown the door.
So, let's not take the piss here.
I certainly wasn't.
Well, I think you are.
Dalglish had returned to the club in an ambassadorial role and had even assisted them in appointing Roy Hodgson, so he was publicly involved with the club once again since roughly 2009. However, 2 years down, something had to be done, so you likely won't be surprised to learn that when helping Liverpool pick a new manager, amongst those proposed was Kenny Dalglish's. His wish was granted in January 2011. First as a caretaker, then in a permanent role some months later. A couple weeks after he signed, Luis Suarez and Andy Carroll joined. A month later, Liverpool won the League Cup, the first piece of silverware in about 6 years. However, Liverpool had many problems, and unfortunately, Dalglish just wasn't equipped to solve them. Perhaps his methods were antiquated. Perhaps the team just wasn't good enough. Perhaps it was a combination of both of those things and more. I think it was that, actually. Andy Carroll never truly clicked. Despite being the most expensive player in club history, they dropped to 8th place in the league, and Luis Suarez was caught racially abusing Manchester United left-back Patrice Evra. When Suarez was banned for this, Liverpool warmed up in Luis Suarez shirts to show their support for what they believed to be an unjust ruling. This soured public opinions. Dalglish also publicly defended Suarez on a few occasions, only to be forced to apologize publicly by the Liverpool ownership. Despite the 8th place finish, Liverpool did make it to the FA Cup final. All the same, it wasn't good enough, and a year into his return, he was shown the door. Sir Alex Ferguson, among many others, believed the Suarez incident was the main reason for this dismissal.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 117
That was pretty much that in terms of Kenny Dalglish's managerial career. An unsavory end, yes, but also one that I don't feel we should dwell on. Dalglish is a very unique character when you put his entire life and career into perspective. He achieved so much at such a young age and positioned himself so strongly as a living legend so quickly. But it wasn't just his actions on the pitch that make him the man that we all view him as. The 11-year gap in between managerial positions that he took weren't spent on the golf course. Not entirely, at least. It was spent giving back. After his wife was diagnosed with cancer in 2003 and thankfully made a recovery, the Dalglish family set up the Marina Dalglish Appeal, a platform aimed at raising funds for cancer patients in need and research for emerging treatments. Along with his attention to detail and care in the wake of the Hillsborough disaster, it's clear to all that this is a deeply caring individual with the sense of duty to community. And because of that, in conjunction with his, quite frankly, unprecedented career in football, many felt he was deserving of appropriate commemoration. Now, he was already appointed as MBE dating back to 1985, but it was only in 2018 that he finally received what many had been appealing for decades, a knighthood. As he was in his career, he was never the type to take all the glory. He dedicated the honor to Liverpool, Celtic, Jock Stein, Bill Shankly, and Bob Paisley. That was before admitting to feeling a wee bit embarrassed. In 2017, a year before that, he was immortalized at Anfield after Anfield's centenary stand on the southeast face of the stadium was renamed the Kenny Dalglish Stand. Sir Kenneth Dalglish is a truly one-of-a-kind person. I genuinely do not believe we will ever see anybody come close to achieving what this man has in the manner in which he did. From blowing off Liverpool for a Rangers match, to returning and conquering Europe, to being both the manager and the best player on the pitch, to making fairy tales come true, and finally empowering others to fight and win. This man never needed recognition from traditional royalty to showcase his social standing. Officially, you should refer to him as Sir, but there is another title that millions in red believe is more fitting: King.